Hey everyone, my name is Michael Witherell. Today I chose to give a presentation on Chapter 7, which is the era of federal social services, the new frontier, and the Great Society. The main reason I chose this chapter over the other ones is because of three key points that this chapter discusses. The first one being the John F. Kennedy assassination. The second one being that this chapter talks about Medicare and Medicaid. I'm a risk management and insurance major, so that's obviously something that intrigues me. And the third and final reason I chose this chapter was because it discussed the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. So in this segment, I want to talk about John F. Kennedy. Not so much his assassination, but all that he accomplished or tried to accomplish prior to his assassination. Now, in 1960, when John F. Kennedy was on the campaign trail, he voiced his support of education and funding to provide aid to elderly. Now, at the time over in Europe, there were a lot of politicians over there that started to have programs in place that would provide education and aid to elderly people through the government funding. Now, in America, we were very, very fearful of that at the time. So, believe it or not, back when Barack Obama was proposing Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, this was not the first time that we were getting opposition to a federally funded healthcare system. This happened all the way back in 1960, which I thought was a very, very interesting fact. Now moving on to the next segment, which is Medicare and Medicaid. Now this is still going to resort back to John F. Kennedy because he was the president at this time. Now, John F. Kennedy was in large support of Medicare and Medicaid, and it proved to be a godsend to several elderly people, millions of elderly people who needed care and needed support. It is still a program that is in place to this day that is loved by millions of Americans. Now, the interesting point here that I would really like to point out is that Medicare actually attributed to inflation costs because under John F. Kennedy's program, he would reimburse all healthcare providers for the supplies that they used. Therefore, they wouldn't have an incentive to decrease their prices. I thought that this was cool to see how a program that would help millions of people, in the long run, it would actually cause higher prices and inflation. I guess it all really boils down to the point of, would you rather have a very hands-on approach with social welfare and with the government, or would you like to just let it run its course? Now in the book they discuss about how liberals and conservatives consistently butt heads over these type of issues. Conservatives typically like to think that without regulation, keep your hands off, in the long run, everybody will no longer be impoverished. The liberals, on the other hand, or the Democrats, they feel as if they need to intervene, interject, and therefore they can allow everybody to get an equal distribution of wealth. I see both points in this situation, and I think over history and over time, we've seen that in certain scenarios, the Democrats were right, and in certain scenarios, the conservatives were right. I just thought it was interesting to point out that in this scenario, the intervention of John F. Kennedy to help millions of elderly Americans actually resulted in an inflation of medical costs. But then you have to ask yourself this question: what's more important, higher medical costs or keeping millions of elderly Americans alive who otherwise would have had the funds? The third and final segment is going to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. Similar to my segment about John F. Kennedy, this isn't going to necessarily focus on his assassination, but what he accomplished leading up to his assassination. Now, in 1966, Martin Luther King Jr. moved his movement to Chicago. There, he found a very concentrated area of impoverished people. They were lacking medical supplies, lacking education, and really just an overall good quality of life. Now, in the forum posting that Dr. Hamilton asked us to respond to, I made the point that I feel like a lot of politicians nowadays use these impoverished areas to really gain votes, almost using them as a puppet, yet we really see no dramatic improvement in these areas. It is something that has been consistent. Now, the textbook discusses how over the decades after 1966, the poverty rate seemed to be getting better. But in all reality, the poverty rate was higher than ever. It just wasn't being concentrated on. Now, the people who became more impoverished and people who stayed to be impoverished were mainly blacks and single white women. So it's almost kind of an interesting point that these areas have consistently gotten worse, yet there's been no intervention. And I know that there's something that we can do about it, but that is really something that we have to create a dialogue about. And I think the most important thing that we can do is give people of color, give minorities voices. I feel like all the time we are hearing about people of color's experiences through the mouth of somebody who's never experienced it. I just would like to see people go out to these areas and really talk and create a dialogue with the people affected to really try to pull themselves out of this. This is something that we really need to work on. But all in all, that's my presentation of Chapter 7. I really hope that y'all enjoyed it. If you have anything that you would like to add to this, or really any questions for me, please feel free to comment or reply to this forum post. It's something that I really enjoy doing. And like I said, I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I really hope you have a good rest of your day.